On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have a very unique guest who's in a very unique setting. When it comes to the athletic training profession, we have Aaron Ngor, who is an athletic trainer out in California and is really focusing on the performance, dance, and in particular the breaking community. We had a really great discussion on just what that has looked like being an entrepreneur and starting Offset Med and what that looks like, and just even the evolution in the relatively short time it's been around of what services they were looking to provide, how they were setting that up. Also got into the nuts and bolts of what do you do with physician approval. And we have one coming out in a week or two that will go and talk about that as well, what that means, and kind of just the hurdles as of right now athletic trainers have to jump through in order to private practice. Really, really interesting episode. Aaron's doing some really unique things, and I think it's pretty awesome, especially with breaking being part of the Olympics here coming up in the next 4 years, I believe. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Please think about them to check them out as you're looking at your sports medicine needs. Great stuff, great people. But without further ado, we will turn it over to the episode and enjoy. This episode of Athletic Training Chat, we are on with Aaron Ngor. We connected through Twitter because that seems to be the only way people can connect anymore these days, given everything in the world. But I believe you popped up because there was a third-party billing conversation going on, and then I just clicked in and you saw you were doing some really interesting things. And so I know that's going to be we'll eventually get to the topic of that most likely, but your work with performance and dance, and then looking even further into that, actually running your own company. We've had a couple AT entrepreneurs on, but I think it is a fascinating area for the profession, one that I'm fascinated by. Have no idea if I'd ever be able to go out and do it. I don't know if I just have the stomach for it in that regard. But anyway, really wanted to talk about that stuff as the highlight of this. But before I keep going, wanted to turn it over to you to fill in some background and just kind of how you got to where you are, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
I appreciate you having on, Joel. It's kind of surreal, right? Connecting through Twitter, and then all of a sudden we're in a podcast together. But just to give all the listeners a background about myself, I'm an athlete trainer currently practicing in Southern California. I would say my background is very non-traditional. I think the origin stories is very similar to how a lot of ATs get into the profession, except I was a dancer rather than your typical basketball, soccer athlete. Got hurt and had an interaction with a physical therapist that helped me get back onto my feet. But was like, is this it? Like, I'm back to walking and running. And I had a ACL reconstruction done. So There were still some milestones I did not feel confident in meeting in my own approach to return to dance as a young dancer. And I kind of had a chip on my shoulder pretty much after that. And I was like, I'm going to be that person to figure this out. Luckily, I had some good interactions with the AT at my high school. Being in California, it's pretty lucky to have a full-time athletic trainer at your high school. And he was a quality athletic trainer. So shout out to Nelson Chen at the time. And that kind of kickstarted my journey into the realm of AT. But at the same time, I was going through it was a bachelor's degree at the time, not a master's. Yeah. And I was able to do that and also still compete as a dancer in the Southern California circuit, which was a lot, having to go to rehearsal, still show up to classes, go to clinicals, and then just repeat that grind. By the end of it, I definitely saw the need, even not only myself, but my peers. And I was like, man, this community is significantly underserved. I want to see some sort of infrastructure built in here that we would normally see in whether it's high school, collegiate, professional athletics. I was like, why isn't this here? So again, this chip on my shoulder continues to grow and grow. But at the same time, professionally, I felt the need to learn all these different roles that I felt were missing, and not just the AT role, but like, what does it mean for a coach to have a part in this return to performance spectrum? What does it mean to have other stakeholders involved, like the athletic director, or in the case of dance, it's like the artistic director, the company director? Who's funneling money in? Where are they getting money from? The sponsors? Are they getting it from, sales? Like, and this kind of started this little entrepreneurial bug, but I didn't really know it at the time. I was just like, what are these underlying mechanisms to why this sport has all this stuff, but this one doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. And so, just to kind of get back on track, I ended up securing a performing arts graduate assistantship with the Shape Clinic in Ohio. So I was happily to be mentored under Dr. Jeffrey Russell, and he publishes a lot of performing arts medicine research and serves on numerous boards. So, I got to see what it was like for him to build a performing arts clinic in the collegiate setting, and see what type of barriers he ran into, but also how he developed relationships to allow that to happen. And, it was both a eye-opening thing, but also it made me learn, like, okay, if I continue on this path with, this idea of wanting to do performing arts medicine, there's even separate subsets within that. It's like, do you want to do that at a collegiate level? Do you want to do that in the entrepreneurial sense? Do you want to do that in a private company and do touring? Those are like all separate skill sets with separate things. So I was like, I came here for answers, and I left with more questions.
Yes, I can imagine.
And to be honest, it was a tough decision after my graduate assistantship. Because, as you know, performing arts medicine opportunities are few and far to come between. But luckily, I had built relationships back when I was an undergraduate. I was able to secure an internship with Disneyland back at the time when they were still operating. So my connections there opened up, basically a door where I could step in and start my professional career. And then that kind of went on to other opportunities, to where now I'm very lucky to be in a position where I'm an adjunct professor at a performing arts college in LA, and I get to teach, these incoming freshmen, these basic, I guess, health, wellness, prevention skills that, we learn in athletic training profession. Like, what is basic performance nutrition? What's a good warm-up look like? Why does the anatomy matter in this particular thing? How do you troubleshoot, injuries, aches, pains, things like that for self-care? And then I also work at the college as a athletic trainer as well. So that's kind of like, what I did after. But then during that time, it's like always the off hours, you're slowly building your vision of how you want to put your experience into the world. So I started a company called Ngor-Offset Med, and it was a play on words in terms of like how medicine is going. We wanted to do something slightly different to offset the issues and lack of attention to specialized care that our performing artists needed. And then, being offset versus onset in terms of camera production and film. Sure. I thought that was really fun. So that's the company we started, and we just we kind of bootstrapped it, where we just rolled up to some events. I had some previous connections with the event host and organizer, and I was like, can we set up a little clinic here for your artists? And they're like, sure, we have no idea what you're doing or what this is, but I trust you. So,
There
do
you
whatever
go.
you want. And, we got in there and everyone was like blown away. They're like, what is this? Like, I can come here and you guys can talk to me about my injuries and you guys can actually help me. And it was such like a novel concept
Right.
in that population, and we were like, okay, so we can try and build this and see where this takes us. So that's kind of the whole thing in short.
Oh, so many directions I could take this. Kind of a couple of just, and I think California plays into the context of this a little bit with license and all the different things there. Um, just the only thing I've ever really seen frequently around dance is every once in a while on the NATA one, you'll see Vegas pop up. That seems to be a lot of the performing arts. So
Mhm.
I think it's a small emerging one. But specifically in California, in starting your own company, like, do you have to work under a physician, or because of the way things are set up, you're able to go out and do this, as an athletic trainer to provide, like you said, kind of setting up these, your initial kind of like clinic, as you had mentioned.
Yeah, this was a huge question I battled with when I came back.
Mm-hmm.
We know that best standard, or quote unquote, the standard of care is to work under a physician and have that standard operating procedure. Like, we learned that in school. So this is where theory to practice, there's a little disconnect now. And everything I feel like I've learned is very contextual. So, I mean, I'll kind of explain the process.
Yeah.
Um, so I moved back, and that was my mindset. I was like, I need to go find a physician I need to
Sure.
create this idea with. And again, I hit up an old preceptor of mine, when we used to do Gen Med rotations back in school. His name was Dr. Gutierrez. He was I think he's still the team doctor for USA Volleyball, but he does a lot of work with American Ballet Theater in Orange County. And I remember having early conversations with him about my ideas, my plans, and like, can you just, give me an SOP and, we'll get this started. And he was like, hold on there. Like, he's like, it was funny because he always brought it back to kind of like these really fundamental questions where it was like, well, first of all, you do know that California, there is no licensure for athletic training. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But I'm like, I'm trying to stay with the best practice and I want to hold the highest standard. And he's like, okay, that's great and all. So what is it? What is going to be my job responsibility, my duties? Right. And so I like thought about it. I was like, well, like, I would love for you to like show up at these events and, do all these things. And he's like, Aaron, I run my own private practice. And if I'm not there, my practice doesn't make money. And if they're not paying you, this is pro bono work. And if you have no business plan for this and no way for a mutual exchange, then it's not sustainable. And I was like, well, this is really hard.
See, I think that part right there, and I want you to continue, is where I get hung up. It's like, oh crap, now I got to figure out how to make money. So,
right. And I mean, that's where I definitely got hung up on. So, further down the conversation, I mean, I was brand new,
mm-hmm.
and I had roughly a plan. But during my early conversations with him, and even before, when I was doing my Gen Med rotations with him, he asked me, pick a career path where, you are allowed to do what you love to do. And at that time, I was like, do I want to stay in AT? Do I want to become a PA? Do I want to become a full-fledged doctor? And he was like, well, what do you want to do? I was like, I want to educate performing artists. I want to make sure that they are, rehab properly and, return to strength and be able to perform. And he was like, do you need a medical license to do that? And I was like, technically not, especially if I'm thinking about staying in California.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, there it is. And I was like, okay. And I was like kind of satisfied with that answer for a little while. And then obviously fast forward, I come back, I'm trying to make this idea happen. And then in the back of my head is like, you told me I didn't need this. um, and so now it became a situation of like, can I make this work or can I make this sustainable? So I go back to the drawing board and we do a couple of events. And I'm like, okay, well, there's still missing pieces to this, right? It's the first one. I obviously don't go up to the event organizer and say, I'm going to provide you the full suite of care. I'll even provide you an AED. I'll even provide splint. Like I don't have that stuff, so I can't say
Right.
that. So it's very, very specific in what I'm able to offer at the time and what's within my scope and understanding my own limitations. So I think that's what allowed me to do that. I think over time, as we grew, I started trying to find other physicians to come on board and was lucky to reconnect with another good friend of mine. Her name is Dr. Tina Wang. She also works with a lot of performing artists as well, and is a PMNR, physical medicine and
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitation specialist. And, we got into a recent conversation where I was like, maybe it's time for me to revisit establishing another SOP or trying to get this plan up again. And it's interesting because her take was that, the reason why that it's so difficult, even within medicine itself, it's not even like athletic trainer to physician. It's just the whole concept of medical liability.
Mm-hmm.
Like for a physician to sign off on these orders that isn't there present and have a good standing relationship, and they have to literally put their license on the line for you. Like that is a tall order.
That's asking quite a bit. Yeah, I hear you.
So I can understand why it works in professional settings and, settings where there's a lot of income because they can actually pay off that, medical liability or that waiver so that you can have that physician sign on board. And obviously, they're going to have very, very strict outlines of what can be done, what can't be done, because if someone messes up, it's going to go back onto them. And I think athletic trainers looking to establish these operating procedures with physicians, it's not about, I guess, like having the idea or the plan anymore. It's about like developing the relationship first. Because now, like I understand I don't have, an official SOP. I understand I'm practicing in California. It doesn't mean I'm not practicing under uh, physician supervision. Because if I
Sure.
run into an issue, I can text them. Like they are only a phone call away.
Yep.
So how is that any different than working in a D1 setting where you have an established relationship with a physician? Even when I was in graduate school and we had a DO, and same thing, I ran into a case. There's an athlete that just had a concussion. I felt like I was missing something. And then I would just call him and be like, hey, can you help me do this eval?
Sure.
You know? And it's because we have that established relationship and trust. And with them, it like took some reps too, because they needed to see me try it and they needed to see me fail and succeed. And until they're like, okay, like I'm pretty comfortable with your skill set. So that's how it kind of ended up.
Yep. I think that's the unique thing, especially in the other states. That'll be in. Just see how that plays out for athletic trainers. I know they're looking to try and at different states go more autonomous in terms of their licensure when it comes to those things. So it'll be an interesting future, to say the least.
I'm very curious, and for any ATs or physicians listening to this, I'm curious to see what your input and thoughts are too, because like I said, and like you said, it's going to be different for every state and
Yep.
wherever you're practicing. And I already know, especially if we kind of talk legal battles, that some professions are going to be unhappy of letting other professions have a little autonomy and things like that.
Yes. Yes, they will. Um, Curious as to kind of the like business model of Offset Med. You referenced earlier kind of the initial things. You kind of went and set up at an event and had people coming and seeing you and doing things. Not getting quite into the insurance thing yet, but in that, you said you're a cash based company. So is it exclusively like seeing people like one on one in kind of a traditional in quotes sense, or are you doing things like you're going out and instead of necessarily covering a large basketball tournament that the organization's paying you to be there, is that something that you guys do, or is it a healthy combination of the both of those things?
Yeah, I would say if you if you look at businesses, you will see what businesses do, and then you will see what businesses turn into their accountants.
Okay.
So, um, I mean that to say that you know, a business's cash flow may not always look like what the businesses does on a daily basis.
Sure.
So I would say our particular practice has evolved over even the past year, to be honest, because that was kind of like how we were operating, where our initial model was that we would, have conversations with potential event organizers where we knew there were going to be a lot of people in our target demographic
Mm-hmm.
being dancers, and offer our pro bono services there.
Okay.
And then our conversations there would be like, if you liked what you received today and you want to continue this, let's set up an appointment, let's set up a call, let's set up a consult, and then we'd see you one-on-one. Over time, we've learned that, at least in our population, was that we weren't making money from being at these large events, because, if anything, it was more about brand awareness. It was
Mm-hmm.
more about showing up, meeting the person, and seeing what they had to offer. So it's very much a marketing maneuver. And then you test that marketing maneuver depending on what conversions or return on investment you get from that interaction. And most of the time, I would say the education and the knowledge of what our profession provides is like, no one knows that in the quote unquote dance performing arts world.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very well established what a chiro does, what a physical therapist does,
Sure.
but athletic training, very, very, very new concept. So it ended up working to our advantage in the sense that we were very well known. We would see the same competitors at each event. And as the year went on, they would trust us more and more. They would refer people to us. They were more comfortable being around us. So, as like I said, on a bank statement, we're like taking hits and hits. But the social value, the relationship value, that actually compounded. So it's kind of a different metric.
Mm-hmm.
So as we were doing that, like you said, we are cash based. So we would talk with our clients and say, like, it's pretty much, if it's like, as you would go try and service your car, like, can you check if my alignment's good? How long is this going to take? An hour or 2 hours, right? So we had those conversations with them after we kind of do an initial assessment and meeting with them, and then build a plan from there. and then agree on a price point. Over time, obviously, in COVID times, we weren't able to do events as much. We weren't able to kind of lease or rent out a facility to conduct our treatments and sessions. So we actually are in the process of, pivoting to a more education-based service,
Okay.
where we are creating our own kind of content, and teaching other clinicians the basic infrastructure and framework on how we approach treating performing artists. And specifically with us, the breaking population. And, breaking just made it to the 2024 Olympics. So we're really excited about that.
Sure. Kind of just jumping off of that, with the pivot to education, you had a background in performance, that ultimately kind of drove a lot of, it sounds like a lot of, your kind of career decisions and getting to work in that. For somebody that has an interest in working in this setting of athletic training, what advice would you give those people?
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that you don't have to be a performing artist to work in the performing arts. I think you can learn it, because I truly believe everyone's kind of got an artistic side to them. And kind of tapping into that, it's kind of like the same concept as what I had to do when I didn't know what basketball was or football was and
Mm-hmm.
all that. You immerse yourself in it, right? You start watching games, but in the case of dance, watch dance performances. Go out and see a show when that obviously becomes available. Um,
Yeah.
and if you have friends that are in the arts, like talk with them, ask them about their experience, ask them about their life. If you don't have friends in the performing arts, go out online. There's plenty of artists offering classes, individual mentorships, one-on-ones, privates. There's platforms where you can actually take classes online now. Like there's so many different ways to get yourself indirectly involved to just learn things that we care about. Like what are the mechanics? What are the language that they use? What are the things that they care about? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that if you want to work in the performing arts world, you have to understand that's a culture. It's not just a sports setting or a
Right.
type of movement. It embodies something much more than that. And once you get, immersed in the culture, then naturally people are going to recognize that, oh, like you understand what I'm talking about. And then that kind of feeds into building that relationship and trust. And then that can feed into like, hey, can you take a look at, my shoulder? Because when I do this movement, it really bothers it. And then you can kind of like, oh, well, this is something I'm familiar with. And you just work
Right.
through it
Right.
that way.
No, that's perfect and unique to just, again, to get in and get after it. And I think that's really good advice. Um, I do want to talk about, cash based versus third party and just kind of your general take on it. From being on one side of the athletic training profession in terms of your cash based model. And I know we were talking a little bit off air, just about how that looks from setting to setting, as that became a very hot topic very quickly on Twitter, and I think is slowed down a little bit. But before we jump into that, I don't want to jump off of the Offset Med or anything else if we haven't covered everything you would like to. So, is there anything else
Man,
around, going on that entrepreneurial route, that you would want to discuss or share to somebody that might be considering doing it?
that definitely is a can of worms. But
Sorry, yeah, open-ended questions. I'm big on
I would say, if you are interested in jumping more into the entrepreneurial route of athletic training. Um, and trust me, there's a lot of, I guess, fears or, ideas of what that looks like. I feel like the biggest thing to do is to, like, A, understand that you may not hit all the marks that you imagined for yourself. So you kind of have to let go of some expectation, because, as crazy as it sounds, most of the time, if we think about what the athletic profession or like job settings is in terms of like career, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is very controlled. You work for an employer, and it is very like you earn a salary. Maybe it's per diem, you earn an hourly wage. But when you transition to this entrepreneurial side, you take full ownership of the loss and gains that you get. Especially in the beginning, like your inputs may not always match your outputs, is
Mm-hmm.
the simplest way I can put it. But as you get better, as you learn these skills, they may start to, align themselves or maybe outperform themselves. But it can be learned. I reflect back now where, I mean, I started thinking and creating this venture when I finished grad school in 2018. And I knew nothing about business, absolutely nothing. I was like a clinician at heart.
Sure.
And that was 2 years ago. But then when I think back 2 years prior to even finishing grad school, I was like fresh out of undergrad, and I like barely knew anything about athletic training. So like if you give yourself the time to be, immersed in it, then it will come. It's just, I think the daily in and grind and the letdowns and the losses can sometimes discourage people. But I would say know that it's there because it's trying to test your resolve, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how badly do you want to learn this? How badly do you
Sure.
want to keep pushing through this? So I would say that's probably a good starting point.
Yeah, you can learn a lot in 2 years if you dedicate yourself to whatever it is that you want to learn. And like I think you said, the immersion part of it is so important, in trying to fully get a grasp of it. It's one thing to read; it's another to figure it out on in real time.
You said it perfectly, man.
um, what is your take on third party billing and athletic training, kind of specifically to your setting? A private practice, if that's a route. I know you've kind of mentioned that you guys are looking to pivot to an educational thing, which I think is awesome as well, and has so many other positives to it. But if you were to continue to try and do private practice, is it something that you see as a potential in the future, or is it necessary to prove the value of an athletic trainer, do you think, to get on the insurance billing train, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's not as simple of a question. I think there are some underlying questions that could lead you to a good answer or not. So in essence, right, if we talk about what third party reimbursement is that, you the new player that enters the field is the insurance company,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have the medical provider, the insurance company, and the client or the patient. So, in that sense, most people are gonna have to go through insurance. They're very conditioned to, like, I gotta buy health insurance to access medical services.
Yep.
And this is for every American, right? Um, which means that the volume of people that you're gonna see and type of people that you're gonna see is very wide. Um, and the problems that you will see are very wide.
Yes.
So I'm just opening it up with that because in essence, when it comes to whether you want to do cash based or accept third party reimbursement, it's almost like saying how much control do you want to have in the type of patients that you want to work with?
Sure.
Before we even get to kind of like the legal and logisticals things of it. Because the conversations I have with other practitioners working in a cash-based practice is that, over time they've built really strong relationships, but they're not seeing everybody on the face of the planet.
Right.
They're seeing people that they want to see. They're seeing people that value them at the price point that they feel like they're worth. And, it's very hard. It took them a while to get there, but they got there and they're having a thriving practice and it's great.
Right.
And, they don't have to sacrifice volume because they can still make that same quote unquote desired income with the clientele that are able to afford them at that price point. Versus what you normally see in clinics that do take insurance is that if you see them or you look at their schedule, it's like patient after patient after patient because there's just so many people that need to get seen. But because the reimbursement from the insurance company to the medical provider is significantly lower than the value of what it actually costs, they have to see more to meet that margin. So I think it also becomes an issue on, what does the organization or the medical provider value, right?
Sure.
So in the case of Offset Med, we've had conversations because we also have a physical therapist that we work with to eventually open it up so that we can take clients with insurance. But it would have to be processed through our physical therapist, not as an athletic trainer because of the way, the current standing is. So we're talking about why ATs want to fight for third-party reimbursement. I understand, the reasons behind it, because if you look at where ATs are kind of like, where the job settings are, you're thinking mostly high school and college, and depending on the high school, not everyone works at a well-funded high school.
Right.
And maybe insurance, if their parents are paying for insurance, and maybe that is the only option and they can only afford that small little copay or what have you, and it would make it somewhat affordable. But my standpoint on that is like, if your copay to receive physical therapy services or whatever is like $20, $25, what else could you buy with $25? You probably could have, they probably spent that on a foam roller.
Right.
Or something else, like a couple meals. So I think if that becomes the case, it's like, is the value and service you're providing worth what they're exchanging that money for?
Yeah, it seems to become a slippery slope depending on the setting you're in because, and I don't know enough about the details of it. Like, can you go off book if you're billing to insurance? So like if you're billing in 15-minute increments, and you're doing all these things, can you do all this extra stuff, but only bill for the certain things? And does that ultimately, benefit you? But I think your point is really interesting in that, establishing that relationship with your specific clientele and having it being cash based is they probably will come see you for something that insurance won't reimburse anyway. In terms of an ache or a pain or something, that you could really benefit their performance in, but it's not a injury, in quotes, by the definition of the insurance company. And so therefore you've just kind of priced yourself out of being able to get seen because you're not going to get reimbursed for that, even though it could make all the difference in the world.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Anything performance based, even prevention based, is not going to be billed by insurance, or you can't bill it.
Yeah, you have to
And
get
that's the
really,
stuff
really
that's like,
creative.
yeah, I get really creative. It's like, why is it that all the high value care is low value in the face of insurance companies and the medical system? And that's where, you know, I decided to take the entrepreneurial route, because I was like, I definitely see the value in this. Let me show you the value in this. You'll feel it in your body, and then you're going to have like, oh, this is why all my sessions with this last provider through my insurance was not helpful at all.
Hmm.
They didn't take, and there's almost a psychology to it as well. It's like, if I have you, Joel, as one of my patients, and you pay me, I don't know, I know on the back end is that every hour I work with you, I probably get $30 in my pocket. But then I have Larry, that is my cash based patient, and he understands what I'm giving him, and he's willing to pay me $80 an hour.
Hmm.
By default, it's kind of like wiring. It's like, well, you're paying me more. I almost feel like I have to do more for you, or like
Sure.
I feel like I have
Sure.
to deliver a really great session for you, because I know that you also have the choice to leave and do something else with
Absolutely.
somebody else.
Yep.
Versus with you, it's like, well, I'm here. My insurance told me be here. I'm just trying to like go through my thing, and you're like, well,
Yeah,
is
I
my
get
time really
15
worth
of
it?
these until they'll finally give me an injection, so let's just get through them.
Right? It's like almost like a whole
Yeah.
different mindset.
No, I think that's something that's unique. I know a few people locally, that you pay for a 90-minute session and it's what gets accomplished in that 90-minute session. It's not, well, there's 15 minutes for eval or 30 minutes, and then there's your stretching, and then, it's not these unit based things. It's, we're going to do some stuff and we're going to kind of test and retest throughout the whole process of it. And if something seems to be working, well, we're going to continue to work that way. And it's what we can get done in that 90 minutes that you paid for. And so
Mhm.
it's hard not to walk out of somewhere feeling better after 90 minutes of, working with someone, or, after you get through that first 90 minutes, that next 40 or 60 or whatever it may be, because you have that ability to ebb and flow and figure out what's really working.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the secret sauce of it, right?
Yeah, and the copay thing just confuses me too, because I can see in certain institutions there's ways to try and get around the copay, but if you're still having somebody pay you a copay, it's probably going to still get fairly expensive for them unless it's way late in the calendar year. And, just like everybody on insurance, you try and get everything done before it resets on January.
Pretty
And even then, you
much.
might still have
Yeah.
plenty of copays. But depending on what it looks like for your deductible, man, those bills can get just as high, just as quick, if not higher.
I
And I've seen that
I
argument
mean,
as well.
yeah, it's kind of crazy when you like actually look at how people spend their money in relation to medical services. Is that,
Mm.
if you're a healthy athlete, you're probably not going to be meeting your annual deductible in order for
Right.
you to even qualify for cheaper copays. So
Unless you had something big happen.
unless you had something big happen, and I know some providers that are kind of working, with insurance companies, is that they're able to kind of count that as like like you say you have a health savings account, right?
Sure.
You can use that money. They can take that, and then it does kind of like count into what you're paying for. So there are business practices that you can create and construct your practice to allow for something like that to happen. I think you just have to go look for it.
Oh, it'll be a brave new world at some point.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, oh man, I'm just such a bigger thing. Like the health model, or the how it's set up now with insurance. Like we'll see how it changes, obviously, with the political landscape, because that's its own unique thing to throw into it. But at some point, like how big is it going to get? Our local health systems, the one we go through, just raised their rates on absolutely every service they had. Well, I don't know if it'll eventually directly impact me because I'm sure our insurance will change how much we have to pay them because of these new rates, even though they're determining what gets paid. And I, at some point, I feel like that it's one of those too big to fail type moments at some point where it's just going to get so big, it's going to be unaffordable to keep it up. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
that could be a whole other
that's a whole
thing.
nother thing. I mean, that is the model of how insurance companies work. It's
Sure.
like how many people are actually utilizing the services, how many are not. And we got to offset the cost of all these
Yep.
people who are high utilizers.
It's all about the numbers, and they've got those pretty well pegged to make sure that they don't lose money.
This is true.
Uh, Anything else around any of this that you would like to cover before we hop into those AT5 questions?
I mean, I feel like just saying this to say it to anyone who, was following the whole third party reimbursement conversation we had. And, I know I think AT itself is still trying to fight for um, CMS recognition,
Mm-hmm.
just to be able to even get to the next step of third party reimbursement.
Sure.
That part, like I'm for, being recognized as a medical provider
Absolutely.
in the eyes of that. But whether or not to go and push for third party reimbursement, I think it's a mixed bag.
It all depends. It seems like that's the ultimate answer. It depends on the setting you're in. It depends how you want to set it up, and who you're taking care of.
Very true. Very true. But yeah, that's about it, man. I kept it short and sweet.
Fair enough. So jumping into those AT chat questions, this question almost lines up perfectly as we've been talking about this. Where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years? And if you could kind of set the example of that.
Holy moly.
Just a simple,
That's a
subtle
simple question. Yeah. 18, the next 5 to 10 years. Well, I guess I'll kind of, I want to say that I hope that the AT profession continues to just like surprise the NATA with how much they're able to accomplish within the traditional setting, but also these emerging settings.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked at the numbers and see kind of where, most of the profession is working. And I would like to see the pies in those emergent settings continue to grow because,
Sure.
I think those are emerging settings for a reason. Whether you're working corporate, working in industrial settings, like these are industries where there is money available to siphon towards creating sustainable job opportunities. And I hope they recognize that in the educational experiences and material that are provided to help transition athletic trainers better to work with not just, acute sports settings, but for dealing with chronic illness, how to go through more long-term rehabilitation programs and with return to work settings and talking with other stakeholders and how to create some new unique models of care.
Couldn't agree more. Oh, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back as a young athletic trainer? Coming, and if you can set that, coming right out of undergrad, coming right out of grad school.
I feel like if I could give myself any advice back then is to not focus so much on the content of what it is to learn to be an athletic trainer, but rather focus more on building relationships and having experiences with the community you want to impact. So I say that broadly, but to go more in specific, it's like I wish I spent more time, you know, dancing with my friends. I wish I spent more time, you know, going to events and talking with choreographers more. I wish I had more time, building those like or deepening those relationships more rather than saying like, well, I'm just going to study the bones of the body and it's going to make me a better
Sure.
athletic trainer. Right.
Sure. No, I'm with you. What has been so far the most influential resource that you found?
So many.
This question gets so many random answers. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's funny. I would say podcasts, man.
Okay.
I was an early podcast listener back when people were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm
Right.
listening to people talk."
Yep.
But yeah, it's crazy to see how many minds I get to like pick from and learn from, and it's
Absolutely.
freely accessible. Um, and I feel like I know some of these people because I've just listened to their voice so much. But it's cool. I get to learn from ATs, PTs, DCs, business owners, uh,
Absolutely.
just life.
Totally gonna put you on the spot. What are some favorites?
Favorite podcast. It's so funny. I just got the Spotify like 2020 and kind of lists out your
Sure.
most listened to podcasts, and I would say my number one podcast right now. It's purely for just like entertainment listening and keeping up with news, but it's the Snacks Daily podcast,
Okay.
and they talk about business acquisitions and things that are happening in the economy.
Oh, interesting.
And they kind of produce a show every morning. So I do that to be like, wow, this is kind of what's happening in the world and
Sure.
what's kind of governing, consumers right now in the market. My second one is actually one that I've been a long time listener of. It's like the Tim Ferriss show.
Love it. Oh, I'm so far behind because I don't haven't had to drive to work every day
I
because of
know.
COVID.
Yeah.
But man, I love the Tim Ferriss show. That was a huge intro. Like that was number one for me. Like the first podcast listening to. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting because like it's not every episode like I listen to because he just produces so much and they're
Yeah.
long shows.
Yes.
But I feel like there's gonna be something on there for everybody,
Absolutely. Yep. I don't listen to all of them, but I listen to most because if nothing else, it's a chance to like stretch myself a little bit to hear something different.
Yes, I agree. And then I guess for the ones that really love the hard sciences, and sometimes I'm in the mood for that, but other times I'm just there for leisure, as you can tell. I listen to The Drive from Peter Attia.
Okay.
So he's
Haven't listened to him, but have listened to him on Tim Ferriss, and I'm always fascinated by Peter Attia.
yeah, he's like one of those. I feel like this guy's like a unicorn because you're a very well accomplished doctor in functional medicine. You do your own training and work. You understand injury prevention, and you can see this like whole like you understand like the literal biochemistry and
Yeah.
molecular physics of like all this stuff. I'm like, damn, this guy's smart.
Yes. Very smart and very clinical practitioner base. Like not just the smarts, but the actual application of it.
Agreed. So yeah, those are my top three.
Perfect. If you could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, or a mindset, whatever you choose in the field of athletic training, what would it be?
I would. It's funny because I remember reading this question up a little bit earlier, and it kind of stumped me. But I would say my answer would be I wish that athletic trainers um, can remove themselves, or at least remove their ego from treating themselves as like uh, that they are either A, the healers, B, that that their program or their treatment is like the sole reason for someone's success, or three, um, that things are very, very simple, that you can reason through everything. I feel like coming out of athletic training education, everything was very linear based. Like, this is step one, this is step two. You
Hmm.
clear this, you clear through this, and all right, you should be good. Um, and then over time, I've just come to learn that there are a lot of underlying factors,
Sure.
and your hands and clinical judgment can only do so much, and the rest is up to the world.
I hear you. That's something I say a lot, even with my AT students and sometimes staff is, we don't heal anybody. Like we are just trying to help set up the best environment possible for their body and everything else they do to actually heal them. And
Love it.
that's it. Like, don't put that pressure on yourself that you need to heal them, because you can't. Like, you can only set it up for their body to take over, and they play obviously a huge role in that.
Agreed. And I'm not saying that what we don't do is valuable. Like,
Oh,
by all means,
absolutely.
what we do is like we are the shepherds that allow this to happen.
Sure.
But yeah, I think especially for me, it was like, you come in, you're like, all right, had all these internships, I did grad school, I'm a hot shot coming out, and you're
Yep,
like,
yep,
no, life
yep.
life experience will humble you.
I've had that more times than I probably care to admit. Last question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
I would say being an AT for me has, I don't know, it's like this weird relationship where I feel like we're I'm part of this like secret organization that is just creating outcomes after outcomes, and no one wants to like recognize it. So for me, it's more of like I wear it almost like a badge, where I'm like, I'm an AT and I can do what you do, and I can do a little bit of what you do, and a little bit of this. Um, and it's very unique. And I think in my life, I've kind of strived for experiences that kind of, make me feel that way. And I
For
think
sure.
AT was one of the ways to do that.
That's a unique way to look at it, and I really like it. So thank you for sharing that one. I hadn't thought of it that way. So
Yeah,
I
man,
really
no
like that
problem.
perspective. Before we officially wrap up, if people wanted to reach out to you, get in contact, we'll link up everything that you shared with me. But if you just wanted to say it out loud, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably most active now on Twitter. But you can also find Offset Med on Instagram at
Perfect.
offset.med. We also got a website. You could also go check out our website, www.offsetmed.com.
Perfect. We will get
But
that all linked up so people can get to that.
but yeah, I
Um,
mean, as you can tell, always open for conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that because it works out pretty well for me that you were open to having the conversation. Well, I really do appreciate you taking the time. Look forward to continuing to see what you do through the social media sphere, and hope to connect at some point again in the future.
Appreciate you, Joel. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely.